Welcome back to the deep dive. You know we love getting your requests, and today we're diving into one you specifically asked for, charisma. You've sent over some really interesting excerpts from a book on how to cultivate charisma, and we're excited to unpack it all with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because we often think of charisma as something you're either born with or you're not. But this book really breaks it down as a skill, something you can actually develop and hone over time.
That's right. And the book jumps right into the importance of first impressions. It actually highlights a study about performance reviews where people reacted more to body language than to what was actually being said, especially in those high pressure situations.
Right. That's because in stressful situations, the part of our brain that deals with complex language kind of takes a backseat to the more primal parts of our brain, like the amygdala. And the amygdala is hyper-focused on nonverbal cues because it's constantly scanning for threats. It's an evolutionary thing, for our ancestors.
Mhm.
Quickly assessing whether someone was friend or foe could mean the difference between life and death.
So even if we're giving someone a glowing review, if our body language is sending negative signals, their amygdala is going to pick up on that and interpret it as a threat.
Exactly. And that's why the book emphasizes the importance of understanding how we're perceived in those first few seconds of an interaction. It says people are making snap judgments about trustworthiness and competence almost instantly.
Makes me wonder about those times when we might have misjudged someone based on a first impression. Do you think it's possible to overcome a negative first impression?
It definitely is. And the book gives some really interesting techniques for doing just that, like mirroring. You ever noticed how when you're really connecting with someone, you unconsciously start to match their body language? You might cross your legs when they do, or tilt your head the same way.
Now that you mention it, I have noticed that. It's almost like an unconscious dance.
Exactly. And that's what mirroring is all about. It's subtly matching the other person's body language to build rapport.
The book actually had an example of a guy named Darius who used mirroring to win over this skeptical executive.
All right.
Apparently, he was mirroring George's posture and gestures without even realizing it. And it totally changed the dynamic of their interaction.
There's actually a psychological phenomenon behind this called the chameleon effect. Research has shown that when people subtly mimic each other's behavior, it creates a sense of liking and trust.
So it's not just about appearing more likable, it's actually creating a real neurological connection.
That's right. It taps into our primal need for belonging and connection. When someone mirrors us, it signals that they're on the same wavelength, that they understand us.
So, how can we use mirroring effectively, especially if we want to recover from a less than stellar first impression?
The book gives a few really helpful tips. If you sense that you've accidentally put someone off, you can try subtly mirroring their body language to rebuild rapport. It's almost like hitting a reset button.
But what if the person is displaying negative body language, like crossed arms or a furrowed brow? Wouldn't mirroring that just make things worse?
That's a great point. You definitely want to avoid mirroring negative body language like anger or defensiveness. In those cases, the book recommends trying to break their posture by handing them something, a pen, a book, anything to get them to shift position. Once their posture changes, you can start subtly mirroring their new, hopefully more relaxed posture.
That's such a clever technique. I'm going to have to try that.
It's all about being aware of those nonverbal cues and responding in a way that creates connection and trust.
So, we've talked about how crucial first impressions are and how mirroring can help us make a good impression or even fix a bad one. But the book also dives into the idea that there are different styles of charisma. They talk about focus, authority, and visionary charisma. Is it about picking the right style for the right situation?
That's exactly right. The book stresses that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to charisma. The most effective style will depend on who you're interacting with, the context of the situation, and what you're trying to achieve. For example, if you're dealing with someone who's feeling overlooked or unheard, using focus charisma, where you really lean into active listening, can be incredibly powerful.
The book gives an example of a chairman who used this approach to win over the head of the Spanish branch who felt ignored. By simply giving the guy his undivided attention, he was able to completely turn the situation around.
It's about understanding what the other person needs and adapting your style to meet those needs.
So it's not about being a charismatic chameleon who changes their personality to please everyone. It's more about having a toolbox of charisma skills that you can draw on depending on the situation.
Exactly. And the first step is becoming aware of your own natural tendencies and then learning how to flex those tendencies to connect with different types of people.
This is fascinating. We've covered a lot of ground already, from the neuroscience of first impressions to the art of mirroring and the different styles of charisma. I'm eager to hear what other insights the book has to offer.
And there's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
Building on those styles, the book delves into the power of body language, using our physical presence to project both warmth and power, which can make a huge difference in how our charisma is perceived.
Yes, there's a whole section about using our body to actually change our mind, which I found really intriguing. I have to admit, at first it sounded a bit out there, but the more I read, the more it made sense.
Right, it might sound a little counterintuitive, but there's a growing body of research on how our physical state can actually influence our mental state, and vice versa. For example, remember we were talking about the amygdala and its role in threat detection? Well, when we slump our shoulders, avoid eye contact, and make ourselves small, our brain interprets that as a sign of weakness or danger, which can trigger a stress response. It's like we're sending a signal to our brain saying, hey, be on high alert, something's not right.
So by changing our posture, we can actually change our brain chemistry.
Exactly. When we stand up straight, take up space, and make eye contact, we're sending a completely different message to our brain. We're saying we're confident, we're in control, and this can actually lower our stress levels and help us project more charisma.
That's amazing. So how do we translate this into practical tips for projecting warmth and power through body language?
Well, for warmth, the book emphasizes respecting personal space,
Mhm.
especially when meeting someone for the first time.
Yeah.
You don't want to crowd people or make them feel uncomfortable.
It reminds me of that experiment they describe in the book where they had people sit next to each other versus across from each other in a subway car. The people sitting across from each other felt much more uncomfortable because they were too close for comfort.
Yes, and there's an evolutionary reason for this. Our brains are always scanning for potential threats, and being too close to someone, even in a harmless setting, can trigger that primal alarm system. It all comes back to the amygdala.
That makes a lot of sense. So, what are some actionable tips for using body language to project warmth? I'm ready to put this knowledge into practice.
One of the biggest ones is eye contact. Good eye contact signals that you're engaged and interested in what the other person has to say. But it's not about staring them down. The key is to have a soft, relaxed gaze.
So, it's more about conveying genuine curiosity rather than intense scrutiny, like how you would look at a cute puppy.
Uh-huh. Maybe not that intense. The idea is to be warm and approachable, not intimidating. The book mentions that there's even scientific evidence that prolonged eye contact can actually trigger the release of oxytocin, often referred to as the love hormone.
Wow, so good. Eye contact literally creates good vibes. I'm definitely going to be more mindful of that. What about power? How do we project that through our body language without coming across as arrogant or aggressive?
That's where the concept of presence comes in. The book uses this great analogy of the big gorilla. Remember, we're wired to associate size with dominance. So taking up space actually makes you appear more powerful.
I love that. I remember the story of Ella, the history major, who decided to take a kickboxing class. As part of the class, they had her try to get people to move out of her way on campus without stepping aside herself. She had to claim her space.
It's a fantastic exercise
Hmm.
because it forces you to become aware of how much space you might be unconsciously giving up to others. Ella started the class feeling timid and unsure of herself. But after that exercise, her whole perception of herself changed. She realized she had the power to command attention.
So it's about owning our space, about inhabiting our bodies fully. That's a powerful image. But I imagine there's a delicate balance between taking up space and being respectful of other people's boundaries.
Absolutely. And that's why the book also emphasizes the power of stillness. Truly powerful people don't need to constantly fidget or seek validation. They know their worth.
Hmm.
And their body language reflects that. They have a quiet confidence that draws people in.
So it's less about frantic hand gestures and more about being calm, collected, and present. I'm picturing royalty. Kings and queens don't need to bounce around to get attention. They command respect through their composure.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot between taking up space and being still. When you combine that with relaxed eye contact, a genuine smile, and an attentive presence, you create an aura of power that's both compelling and approachable.
We've covered a lot of ground with body language. I'm curious, does the book talk about how to actually speak with more charisma?
It absolutely does. And one of the key points the book makes is that people are constantly evaluating the value of what they're hearing compared to the time and attention they're giving. It's as though we're subconsciously weighing the effort involved against the potential reward.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We're also busy and bombarded with information that we instinctively filter out anything that doesn't seem worth our time and energy. So if you want to be seen as charismatic, you need to deliver value, whether that's through entertainment, information, inspiration, or even just making someone feel good.
Precisely. And one of the most effective ways to give value is through storytelling. The book highlights the importance of using imagery and vivid language to make your words come alive. Think about how Steve Jobs used 8 quarters to visually illustrate the weight of the iPod Nano. He could have just said, "It's really light." But by creating a visual, he made the abstract concept of lightness concrete and relatable.
Yeah, it's so much more memorable than just stating a fact. That reminds me of another example they used in the book. Lee Iacocca and his famous line about kicking the tires during the Chrysler turnaround. It wasn't just about the words themselves, it was the image they evoked, the feeling of confidence and resilience.
Exactly. Metaphors and analogies can be incredibly powerful tools for charismatic communication. They allow us to tap into people's emotions and create a lasting impression.
This is all so helpful. But what about those times when we have to deliver bad news? How do we stay charismatic when we're the bearer of unpleasant information?
That's a great question. And it ties into something the book calls managing negative associations. Think about it this way. When we experience something intensely emotional, our brain creates a strong association between that emotion and the person or situation that triggered it. So if you're constantly delivering bad news, people might start associating you with those negative feelings, even if you're not the one responsible for the bad news itself.
It's like the example they gave of the rising stars at the accounting firm. Because they were the ones who had to point out mistakes and deliver critiques, they ended up being disliked even though they were incredibly talented.
It's a classic example of how good intentions can backfire if you're not careful about managing those emotional associations.
So how do we avoid becoming the office bad news bearer? Especially if delivering tough feedback is part of our job.
The book suggests a few strategies. First, timing is crucial. If you have to deliver bad news, do it as soon as possible after the event. Dragging it out will only amplify the negative feelings. Second, focus on the facts and avoid making personal judgments. Stick to the objective details and present the information in a calm, neutral tone.
That makes sense. Don't make it personal focus on the issue at hand. Are there other strategies we can use?
The book also highlights the importance of solution-oriented thinking. When delivering bad news, be prepared to offer solutions or suggestions for improvement. People are much more likely to forgive a mistake if they see that you're taking steps to fix it.
So be timely, be factual, and be solution-oriented. That's a great framework. But I'm also curious about the internal obstacles to charisma. We've talked about external techniques like body language and speaking style. But what about those pesky things like self-doubt and anxiety that can sabotage our efforts?
You're right, those internal obstacles can be incredibly powerful. But the book offers some really helpful guidance for overcoming them. It starts by acknowledging that negative emotions are a normal part of the human experience. We all feel anxious or insecure sometimes. It's just part of being human.
That's reassuring. So often we try to push those feelings away or pretend they don't exist.
Exactly. And that's where the three-step process outlined in the book comes in. The first step is to destigmatize those negative emotions. Remind yourself that everyone experiences them and they don't make you any less capable or worthy.
I like that. Giving ourselves permission to feel those feelings without judgment. What's the next step?
The next step is to neutralize those negative thoughts by questioning their validity. So often we get caught in these negative thought loops without ever stopping to ask if those thoughts are actually true.
That's so true. I'm a master of catastrophizing.
We all do it from time to time. But the key is to catch ourselves in those moments and challenge those thoughts. Ask yourself, what evidence do I have to support this thought? Or is there another way to interpret this situation?
So we're essentially reframing our perspective. What's the final step?
The final step is to rewrite reality. This is where you consciously choose to focus on positive interpretations and possibilities. The book is a great example of a speaker who was riddled with anxiety about an upcoming presentation. Instead of giving in to the anxiety, they spent the night visualizing themselves delivering a successful speech. And guess what? It actually happened.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how our thoughts can shape our reality, so we can actually fake it till we make it with charisma.
It's not about faking it. It's about training your brain. When you repeatedly visualize yourself behaving in a certain way, You're strengthening the neural pathways associated with that behavior. It's like practicing for a sport or a musical instrument. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes. And the book suggests using this technique to access different charismatic mental states like confidence, warmth, and power.
Are there any specific visualizations the book recommends?
Yes, they suggest a few really powerful visualizations. For cultivating gratitude, they suggest imagining your own funeral. It might sound a little morbid, but it's actually an incredibly powerful way to appreciate your life and everything you have.
That's interesting. I can see how that would shift your perspective. What about other emotions like compassion and self-compassion?
For cultivating compassion, the book recommends visualizing the person you're speaking to with angel wings. It might sound a little whimsical, but it can actually help you see that person in a more positive light, which naturally increases warmth and connection. And for developing self-compassion, which is so crucial for confidence and resilience, they recommend a Buddhist meditation practice called metta meditation. It's all about cultivating loving kindness towards yourself and others.
These are all such powerful tools, and realizing that charisma is so much more than just surface level techniques. It's about cultivating these deeper emotional states that allow us to connect with others on a more authentic level. But what about charisma in the digital age? We've talked a lot about face-to-face interactions, but so much of our communication happens online now. Does the book address how to be more charismatic on the phone or through emails?
It definitely touches on that. It emphasizes that even though we're not physically present, those same principles of warmth, power, and value delivery still apply.
So even when we're just typing words on a screen, those nonverbal cues still matter.
Absolutely. Your tone of voice on a phone call,
Yeah.
the words you choose in an email, even the structure and formatting of your message, all of it contributes to the overall impression you create.
That makes sense. So what are some specific tips for being more charismatic in those digital interactions?
For phone calls, one of the simplest but most effective things you can do is to always ask, is this a good time for you? Before launching into your conversation. It shows that you respect the other person's time and attention, which is a subtle but powerful way to project warmth and consideration.
That's such a great reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in our own agenda and forget to consider the other person's perspective.
Exactly. And another tip for phone calls is to pay attention to background noises and be willing to reschedule if the person seems distracted. It shows that you're fully present and engaged in the conversation, even if it's just over the phone.
It's about making that person feel like they're the most important thing in that moment, even if you're miles apart. What about emails?
For emails, one of the biggest tips is to be concise and clear. No one wants to wade through a wall of text. Think about what you want to communicate and get to the point quickly and efficiently.
So we should treat emails like mini speeches with a clear beginning, middle, and end.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to use images or visuals to break up the monotony and make your message more memorable. Even something as simple as a well-placed emoji can add a touch of warmth and personality.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about charisma and how to cultivate it in all areas of my life.
The biggest takeaway for me is that charisma isn't some mystical quality that some people have and others don't. It's a skill, a set of tools and techniques that we can all learn and develop with practice.
So the challenge for our listeners is to think about which of these techniques they want to start practicing today. Whether it's mirroring someone's body language, visualizing themselves, giving a confident presentation, or simply asking, is this a good time for you, before jumping into a phone call. There are so many ways to start incorporating these principles into daily life.
And remember, charisma isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about bringing out the best version of yourself and using your unique strengths to connect with others in a meaningful way.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of charisma. We hope you found it insightful and empowering.